Hello and welcome back to Talking Around the Library Tree, the Lancaster University Library podcast. Today we will be talking about AI and ethical uses and licenses, all good things. So my name is Jenny McHugh and I'm the Research Data Manager here in the Open Research team of the library, and I'm joined by Joe Lindley, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the School of Design at Lancaster and part of the Imagination Lancaster Research Group. Do you want to say hello, Joe?
Hello.
So thanks so much for joining us. So we're here today to talk a little bit about things, research data, code and AI. So kind of a bit of context for you guys. At the moment, the UKRI, one of the biggest funders in the UK, are creating a new research data policy. And they've just drafted it and they're consulting on it at the moment. So one of the kind of exciting things is that they're now going to include algorithms, software code, and other digital objects. So it's a good time and quite a topical time to be talking about AI. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is how can we use it ethically and what are some of the kind of exciting research opportunities that it can provide. So my first question for you is, AI has been a core component of several of your projects. Please, can you tell us a little bit about your research?
Yes, absolutely. It's hard to know where to start this story. Sometimes I want to go back to once upon a time I was born and then build up from there. But that's probably too much detail. It's worth saying I've got a kind of mixed up background. I didn't finish school. I then worked in IT for a few years. I did an art degree, made an album, was a musician, ended up managing a team in the NHS. It was from there, after a very bad day at work, I accidentally saw an advert for a PhD program at Lancaster and came here to do a PhD 12 years ago. That PhD was about design fiction, which is a kind of future-oriented design method, and I was developing that. I said future-oriented design method. I meant a future-oriented research method that uses design. Then I worked around the Internet of Things for a few years, and in 2019 I started making this pivot towards AI. So I use design as a way of trying to understand the future of emerging technologies, and in particular artificial intelligence. In 2020, I was awarded a UKRI Future Leaders Fellowship, which is quite a prestigious research grant that actually runs for 7 years. So I get 7 years to pursue my own project. The meta story of that project is just promoting the idea of design research. So I'm trying to go around and tell the world, science is great, but we could maybe do with slightly dialing that down a bit and in its place dialing up the kind of ways of understanding the world that design can bring. And as part of that, the examples that I'm developing, those are all mostly about artificial intelligence. So I'm taking this design research way of understanding the world and applying it to AI. And within that, there's been a few different projects. One of them, it sounds a bit funny to say this, but one of them was trying to make the equivalent of the laundry care labels that you get inside your clothes, telling you how to wash them, but for artificial intelligence systems or devices or machines. And that was really all about trying to understand how to make these things legible to people. So how they understand what's inside them, what it's actually doing, and what it should mean to them.
Can you tumble dry them? I mean, that's the important question.
Fundamentally, yes. We were trying to figure out, can you tumble dry an AI? That was what we were doing. After that, I've been working around primary education and AI. So really the basic question is, what's the best way of introducing 7 and 8-year-olds to generative AI? And we've been applying design research to that problem with a school here in Lancaster, which has been going really, really well, and that project's currently expanding. And there's a few other projects too, but fundamentally, I'm interested in looking at artificial intelligence as a socio-technical system or a set of systems. It's no one thing, but it certainly involves people and it involves technology. So it's socio-technical, trying to understand the emerging challenges and questions that come up about this as it's being adopted all around us, and using design as a way to get into that.
I mean, it sounds fascinating. I'm sure our listeners will agree. It's like such an exciting time to be looking into this field. And I imagine lots of people are very interested. So for those of our listeners that might not know the specifics of what generative AI is there a kind of working definition that you have?
Yes. Well, no, I don't have one off the top of my head, but I'll try to make some sense out of it. I think that the thing that's worth saying first is we tend to use the shorthand AI to refer to lots of things. And it's a beautifully convenient shorthand. And it actually goes back to the Dartmouth workshop in 1956, where the foundations of modern AI were really established. At that meeting, the legend goes that somebody had proposed complex information processing as the term to refer to this whole space. And it's a very accurate term for all of the technology that we have called AI these days. It's complex information that's processed. But some other bright spark came along and said, well, why don't we call it artificial intelligence, which is fundamentally a much more sexy term.
Yeah.
And of course they went with AI. But the problem is there's a vast amount of different things which are represented by those two little letters. There's everything from quite profound philosophical thinking about what it means to be intelligent through to a really broad range of foundational technologies, everything from natural language processing to image recognition to neural networks and machine learning. And all of the different applications of AI and social imaginaries, really. When we use the term AI, it conjures a vision of how things could be different in the future, powered by cutting-edge technology. So the background is AI is no one thing. Since ChatGPT was released and overnight drastically popularized this class of technology called generative AI, often that is what people are referring to when they say AI. But generative AI is a more specific way to look at it. And for the record, GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And that's just a simple class of technology that all of the different generative AIs tend to use. It's called transformers, and this goes back to a single research paper that was published, I think, 6 or 7 years ago. So they're all using the same basic approach. And with those models, I say models, that's the shorthand term for when you've made an AI, you're left with a single file, which you'll kind of call the model. With those models, they tend to take large data sets, they learn the relationships between those data sets, and once you've done that, you've pre-trained this transformer, and then when you give it something similar to what it saw in the original data set, it will produce something that it thinks is a likely result. So if we apply this to the things like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, these large language models that everyone's become very familiar with quite quickly, they've looked at monumentally large data sets of text, and they've learned that certain things are more likely to come after other things. The simplest example is actually with maths. So if the model will have seen by looking at all of the text on the internet that when it sees 2 plus 2, probably the next thing is going to be equals 4. And that's why these models, even though they're language models, can do math, because they've seen so many different examples. Now, the reality is they've become extremely capable, and sometimes they have different models layered on top of each other, and within a particular system, it'll delegate some tasks to a specialist maths model, some to a specialist coding model. They can, of course, make images as well. Fundamentally, what generative AI is, it's a statistical representation of a huge data set, think something the size of the internet or even bigger. So a statistical representation of all that data, and when you give it a prompt, for example, 2 plus 2, it will use all of that, the power of those statistics to give you hopefully the correct answer, or if not, at least a useful answer.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I feel like I've learned a lot there myself. Brilliant. So obviously, as we kind of hinted at the beginning, a core component of most of your research has also been looking into sort of like the ethical and appropriate uses of AI. What are some of the issues that you're kind of trying to address?
Yeah, it's a great question. A beauty of the design research approach is that we don't tend to work with very specific hypotheses. It's quite a curiosity-driven approach, and that gives us a lot of freedom to be dynamic and move around a problem space rather than focusing on a very, very specific thing. But that's not a suitable answer to your question and doesn't allow me to talk about the work at all. The broadest way of framing it is I'm trying to understand what is an acceptable way of this group of technologies being adopted in the world. Mm-hmm. Now that can translate to lots of different things and lots of different sub-issues. Some of the ones that I'm currently focusing on, in particular coming from a project that's called Shadow Play, is trying to understand what generative AI means for long-held concepts like authorship and ownership and the copyright system, for example. Mm-hmm. And because of what I previously explained, that these systems take huge data sets, they look at the internet and ingest all of that information, and then based on it, they can create things which are very similar to the things they've previously looked at. Mm-hmm. So in the space of visual generative AIs that can learn particular artists' styles and then very cheaply create infinite numbers of similar works, it really disturbs what we think of as the concept of ownership and authorship. So that's one of the issues that I'm particularly interested in at the moment.
So it is very interesting also from an open access point of view as well, because obviously a lot of open access licenses, as some of our listeners might know, are CC BY, so it's with attribution, and obviously there is this issue with attribution as well with some of these models.
Yeah, that's a great example where you might want to openly share your work as long as it's attributed. And these generative AI systems, certainly the current generation of them, don't do that. And the argument of the people running them is that they don't need to because they're not copying the work. They're kind of being inspired by the work. And it exists in, I think, a legal, but more important than legally, a sort of ethical and moral grey area where we don't currently have a sensible framework to make sense of it. So that's a space I'm interested in. And with the Shadow Play piece of work I mentioned, how that functions is it creates images. It creates images so fast that they come across a bit like a video. It's in real time. And we have people using their bodies to control the input image, which is then transformed into an output image, which is made by an AI. It's really good fun to interact with. Mm-hmm. And alongside, someone is choosing particular text prompts to impact the output.
Right.
But the reason we've done it with people's bodies, and the reason we've made the way of controlling the model with a touch screen, is to make the whole experience a bit more tactile. Mm-hmm. And so you can very easily dial up a particular concept. So you could dial up the concept of Van Gogh or pencil drawing, or, as a lot of the kids that use this system do, Pokemon or Minecraft. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, you can really, really visualize and kind of feel in a tactile sense the level to which these fundamentally copyrighted and owned concepts exist inside the model and how the biases work together and things like that. So it's a really interesting way of trying to get to grips with these brand new issues.
So fascinating. Yeah, if you guys haven't checked out this project, I definitely recommend looking on the website, because I was fascinated by some of the art that has been made with it. So I guess the next question really is, how are the Rail licenses that are involved in the Responsible AI project that you're on different from other licenses that people might be familiar with?
Yes, so I've been involved with this group called Rail, which stands for Responsible AI Licensing, for a few years now. And the group was established in response to a particular problem. And the problem was developers, software engineers and researchers coming up with new ways of doing things with AI. And as is often the case, particularly in the world of software development, wanting to be open with this and sharing their code so that other people could build on it. Traditionally, people would do that with some form of open source license. But what happened in several occasions was people would share this code and then someone else would come along and use it for nefarious means. And which was really not what the person who originally wrote the code had in mind. And some of these were really quite horrible stories. So, for example, using an AI innovation, which was shared in an open way, to make non-consensual pornography.
Oh, wow.
And if you're the developer behind that, it puts you in a pretty horrible situation.
Yeah.
You want to share the work, but you obviously don't want to know the fact that you've shared it is really concretely impacting people's lives in a horrible way. So the question comes, is there a way to use the licensing system, which is a very well understood and quite robust system, to help control this? And what we came up with, and I was a latecomer to the group, but me and the other people who'd established the group came up with, was this idea of a responsible AI license. And it's very similar to an open source license. So you might say, you can do anything you want with this software that I'm releasing, or with this source code that I'm releasing under the license. But usually it will come with some conditions. And those conditions might be, for example, do not use this to create likenesses of people without their permission. That would be one concrete example. So yeah, that's the story of responsible AI licenses. We, in the last 12 months, got the license approved, or a standard which defines the license approved by the IEEE, which is a technology standards organization. So that's been a big boost. And we have on the website a license generator on there now. So anyone can go on and fill in the particulars of the thing that they want to license, and it will produce a workable license for them. And some big ticket items are currently licensed using it. I think the original release of Stable Diffusion uses a Rail license. And at the last count, I'm a little bit out of date, but about 6 months ago, it was the most used responsible type license on the platform Hugging Face, which is kind of like a repository for where people share their AI innovations. So it's been really, it's strange to say this, but it's been really exciting being part of this licensing group. It's quite a stuffy idea, but I've been learning a lot. And
hey, we quite like licenses in open research, but
sorry, I've been waiting my whole life to get into the licensing game, and it's been such a cool way to do it.
I mean, also quite an exciting way to have a large impact even beyond academia, right? Like, that's so exciting.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, over the last few years, I've become more and more interested in how we can translate the academic sort of research we do into impact in the real world. And I think this is one potential way to do it. It's actually a question I have at the moment, is how can we capture the impact of what the rail licenses are doing? That's an open question, but yeah, it's super exciting to have something that we've made that's out there that people are really using.
So, as you say, making your research and all of these brilliant projects available to so many people seems like a particular passion of yours. So why is open source and open research important to your research and research culture more broadly, I guess?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. I'm not sure where this belief comes from in me, but when I became an academic, it always seemed to be part of the deal that you should share what you do. It was quite a learning curve when I discovered in the first year or so of my PhD that academics' careers tend to be in part built on the ability to publish, and publishing more so 12 years ago, but still a bit now, is bound up with this strange relationship with the publishers. And it looks to me like they kind of behave like a protection racket, where they're exploiting the need of academics to publish their work to make money. And I found it extremely distasteful. So I, somewhere in there, just had this innate feeling that, well, we're supposed to share what we do, and then saw how, I just looks like a protection racket to me, how this system works. So that's a foundation of wanting to share my stuff. Also, I'm funded by UKRI, and it's a part of the deal is they will pay for me to do my research so long as I make sure that we share everything.
I mean, you also get 5 points there for knowing the UKRI policies. There, well done.
Excellent. 5 points in the bank. But beyond that, if we look at this specifically through a lens of AI, I'll give the example of Stable Diffusion. So Stable Diffusion is a generative image model. So it's the kind of thing where you can type some words and it will create something like a photograph based on those words. I think in 2023, it could be 2022, around the autumn time, the company behind this, they're called Stability AI, gave it away. And this was the first time anyone had effectively open sourced an AI model that worked at this scale. And it was really quite a remarkable moment. If you look back at when they did this, I think the way that they framed this themselves, which was a bit of a marketing gimmick, admittedly, but they said in this 8 gigabyte file, we have captured the entire visual history of humanity.
Oh, I remember seeing that, yeah.
And it's sort of not true to some extent, but there's an element of truth in there. And still that same release, that original open source release that Stability AI put out, is being used by hundreds of thousands, probably millions of people. But beyond that, the fact that they released it in an open way where anyone could adapt it in any way they want, anyone could use it for anything they want, anyone could make money out of it, it immediately kickstarted this maelstrom of a innovation ecosystem. And off that, literally tens or hundreds of thousands of other models, other pieces of software, other little innovations have taken place. And this isn't a new idea. If you look at software and computers in general, the internet basically is built on open source software.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
The servers that run most of our systems are built using Linux, which is an open source version of a previous thing that was called Unix. And by making things open, they get so much better. We make so much more progress. There's so much more innovation. So I think it's a no-brainer that we should have open innovation in the space of AI. And if you contrast that, the flip side is the more proprietary approach that companies like OpenAI are taking. Ironically, they're called OpenAI, even though all of their products are closed. And what they try to do is use vast investment within the context of a private company to make something which people will pay a subscription fee for. And they're being very successful at that at the moment, but fundamentally that has two downsides in my view. One is it slows down the overall ability to innovate quickly and to innovate in a responsible way, because the only way to really be responsible is to share your workings and show how you're doing it. And the other problem with that is that you get locked into if they become something like a monopoly, or 3 or 4 companies together are effectively a monopoly, as we become more and more dependent on these technologies, you end up beholden to a private company. And that to me represents something of a risk. A while ago, I wrote about this in terms of free speech. So it's hopefully this metaphor will come across. What I was saying is, if AI and generative AI becomes the main way that we access our information, then it's crucial that we can see how that generative AI is working, and that in some way, shape or form it's in the public domain. If the keys to how the generative AI are kept secret, and yet that technology is the main way that people access information and learn, then it's akin to removing free speech in a way.
Yeah.
It's a removal of a freedom to maybe not expression, but a freedom to comprehension.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the risk of not having open innovation in this space.
Thank you so much. I mean, I totally agree, as you can imagine, someone that works in open data. But I mean, such a fascinating conversation for our listeners to be able to hear about. So thank you for joining us. If the listeners want to get in touch or they want to get involved in any of your projects, where can they find you?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I hope the answers were not too verbose. It's such a fascinating space. It's hard to stop talking about it sometimes.
No, it's great.
And if people want to look my stuff up, the fellowship project, which has been funding all of this work for the last few years and continues, is called Design Research Works. And the website for that is the word design research, so no space, just design and research, works, as in WORKS. So designresearch.works. There's a whole blog on there of all of the projects I've spoken about. And also on the website is something that I think is worth a look. There's a link at the top that you'll see that says permission to muck about. And what that is a link to a feature-length documentary film that I and collaborators made, in particular Dr. David Green, who was the lead filmmaker. And it tells the story of design research and of this way of looking at the world. That's the overall mission with all of this stuff, is to convince people of the value of design research. So if you found any of this stuff interesting, then go and check out Permission to Muck About, and I hope you enjoy it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you.